We got another story here about conservatives basically just being evil. Like, there's really no other conclusion to come to here other than conservatives want you and your family to die. That might sound hyperbolic now, but I need you all to understand I mean it very seriously. Right? So let's get into it. I wanted to start off by saying that basically, water is critical to being alive. You need water to live, right? And a lot of us rely on tap water. And it turns out that about a century ago, 150 years ago even, people in the United States made a pretty bad decision. And that decision was to use lead pipes to convey water, which they did at the time knowing that lead was toxic, but they did it anyway because lead was also cheaper. So a lot of buildings became riddled with lead pipes. And, this is similar to the issue with lead paint, where we knew for a very long time that lead paint was incredibly toxic. And still, we lobbied to keep lead in paint in the United States for like a full 70 years after most of the world had already banned lead from their paint. So we just had a lot more lead paint floating around in America, which turned out to be not great. But you might be thinking to yourself, but Jack, haven't they been replacing lead piping for a long time now? Surely there's no more lead pipes in America. Wrong, actually, because it turns out that, one, there are still 9.2 million lead pipes still in service right now. 9.2 million. But more so than that, they're lead service pipes. The easiest way to, gather information on the piping, is the service lines. Those are the lines that bring water to buildings. But what's less known as a widespread issue, and it certainly is a widespread issue, are how many buildings still have lead pipes in them. So basically what winds up happening is when they're doing surveys, when the government's doing surveys to determine who still has lead piping, they're really just looking at the service pipes because that's what the government is responsible for. Basically, once the water flows into a property, then it's no longer their problem. You know? Yeah, so basically, they're only testing to make sure that when it hits your property line, there is not a detrimental level of lead in the service line. Once it gets into your property, well, that's your problem. Okay? Essentially. Which causes a lot of issues. And turns out that turns out that lead piping is bad, actually. Half of the U.S. population exposed to adverse levels of lead in early childhood. This is a study from 2022. Now, you might be asking yourself, but wait, if there's only 9.2 million service lines in the United States that provide that are still lead lines, how on earth did this get to be half of the U.S. population? Well, it turns out, if you've ever used gasoline from a gas station, you might have noticed that they call the gasoline unleaded gasoline. They call it unleaded because it used to be leaded, meaning that car exhaust was riddled with lead. It put lead particles throughout the atmosphere, and we can actually see on the timeline of like charting mental development across generations, a dip in like mental achievement, specifically because of lead poisoning in the atmosphere. So let's just take a look here at this study. Considerable effort is expended to protect today's children from lead exposure, but there's little evidence on the harms past lead exposures continue to hold for yesterday's children, who are victims of what we term legacy lead exposures. We estimate that over 170 million Americans alive today were exposed to high lead levels in early childhood, several million of whom were exposed to 5+ times the current reference level. Our estimates allow future work to plan for the health needs of these Americans and to inform estimation of the true contributions of lead exposure to the population health. We estimate population level IQ effects on We estimate population level effects on IQ loss and find that lead is responsible for the loss of 824,097,690 IQ points as of 2015, which is a lot of IQ points. And you might say, but Jack, IQ is a bullshit way of tracking, intelligence. It's riddled with eugenics thought. It was designed for French literacy testing, etc., 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 etc. I fully grant you all of that. But really what this is kind of tracking here is the fact that lead exposure tends to lead to brain development problems, which lead to intellectual disabilities, which lead to difficulties with cognition, leads to a whole host of terrible effects on the human body. It does not help you to have lead in your system. Yeah, a lot of this is lead particles breathed due to combustion. A lot of it, though, is also attributable to lead paint and like the dust from lead paint, or like if you're a small child, one of the things lead paint does is it tastes sweet. So there was a lot of problems in like the 70s and 80s of children licking and sucking on lead paint chips. Children's toys in the United States also used to be painted with lead. Prints on different like mugs and like glasses and stuff. Like if this was made in the 70s or 80s, this would have been made with lead paint. So, like, people would be getting microdosed with it all the time. And, yeah, it's not good, okay? I just want to read through just a little bit of this, okay? This study. Lead is a developmental neurotoxicant in wide industrial use that was once broadly distributed in the environment. The extent of the U.S. population exposed in early life to high levels of lead is unknown, as are the consequences for population IQ. Serial cross-sectional blood lead level data from National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, a nationally representative sample of U.S. children aged 1 to 5 from 1976 to 1980 to 2015 to 2016, was combined with population estimates from the U.S. Census, the Human Mortality Database, and the United Nations. NHANES and leaded gasoline consumption data were used to estimate BLLs, again, blood lead levels, from 1940 to 1975. We estimate the number and proportion of people that fall within 7 BLL categories by year and birth cohort and calculated IQ points lost because of lead exposure. In 2015, over 170 million people had BLLs above 5 in early life, over 54 million above 15, and 4.5 million above 30. So basically, you had a range of people from like, 5 degrees over the, acceptable limit to 30 times the acceptable limit. BLLs greater than 5 were nearly universal among those born 1951 to 1980, while BLLs were considerably lower than 5 among those born since 2001. The average lead-linked loss in cognitive ability was 2.6 IQ points per person as of 2015. It does, if you're wondering, does this go into Flint, Michigan? Why, yes, it does. It does right here in the second paragraph. Right after they quote, "The past isn't dead. It's not really even the past." William Faulkner, Requiem for a Nun. God. The Flint water crisis returned the issue of legacy lead contamination to the public's attention in the fall of 2015, highlighting that harmful lead exposures are still routine in many communities in the United States and around the world. In developed countries, lead's historic use in paints, pipes, and gasoline has left numerous waters, soils, airways, and homes enriched with this neurotoxicant, threatening the health and development of today's children. Less obvious, but also important, is the threat that lead holds for yesterday's children, many of whom are victims. Did we find out why the right is so stupid? I mean, it's not like, again, this is so far spread that it's not just a right or left thing. It's a right and left thing. Let's be real here. Well, I was wondering at one point, hey, I've never been exposed to lead. Anyway, let me drink out of these Garfield mugs from 1986. And then I found out that those Garfield mugs were printed with lead paint and were actively recalled by McDonald's 30, 40 years ago because they were made with lead paint. And I'd been drinking out of them my entire goddamn life. So, yeah, there's a very good chance that many of you have had lead exposure without even knowing it, okay? You guys, I found it out live on stream. I took a drink out of one, and one of you was like, weren't those recalled? And then that is how I found out that the Garfield mugs of my youth were poisoning me. So thank you for that. Oh, God. During the peak era of leaded gasoline in the United States, which ran from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, the average blood lead level for the general U.S. population was routinely 3 to 5 times higher than the current reference level for clinical concern and case management referral. Consequently, millions of adults alive today were exposed to high levels of lead as children. While these exposures were deemed harmless at the time, animal studies and epidemiological evidence accrued in the intervening years reveal that such exposures likely disrupted healthy development across multiple organ systems, particularly brain, bone, and cardiovascular systems, resulting in subtle deficits to important outcomes such as cognitive ability, fine motor skills, and emotional regulation. That may influence the trajectory of a person's life, like their educational attainment, health, wealth, and happiness. These deficits largely persist across time and in some cases worsen, and are now hypothesized to put individuals at risk for difficult-to-treat chronic and age-related diseases, including cardiovascular disease and dementia. So, yeah. I'm almost positive my grandmother fed us lead like crazy. Every mug and her glass was made before civil rights. Oof. Yeah, I feel like if you don't look into it much, people might think crystal is just some neat inert crystal. Nope, it's lead crystal. Yep, if you're using lead mugs, don't. Because like lead doesn't just look like, pencil lead. It can look like a lot of other things or be incorporated into the manufacture of a lot of other things. Any alcohol in lead crystal only takes 1 hour, and it's full of lead. Yep. Oh yeah, no, there is lead crystal that they use to make drinkable, drinkables like cups and such. Yeah. This is lead crystal right here. Lead glass. Not all crystal, but there is a specific type of lead crystal or leaded crystal. And yeah, the Wikipedia on it has an entry here. The amount of lead released into the food or drink increases with the amount of time the vessel is used for storage. In a study performed at North Carolina State University, the amount of lead migration was measured for port wine stored in lead crystal decanters. After 2 days, lead levels were 89 micrograms per liter. After 4 months, lead levels were between 2,000 and 5,000 micrograms per liter. White wine doubled its lead content within an hour of storage and tripled it within 4 hours. Some brandy stored in lead crystal for over 5 years had lead levels around 20,000 micrograms per liter. Yeah. So just be aware of that for sure. Daily usage of lead crystalware without longer term storage was found to add up to 14.5 micrograms per liter of lead from drinking a 350 milligram cola beverage. So, like, even if it's not alcohol, like, you're still getting some lead into your daily consumption if you're using leaded crystal.
Me like buttons.
OS Crane, thank you for gifting Just Jesse a sub. Thank you for helping to continue making this show possible. Yeah. So there's there's some concerns for sure. Yeah. Despite our improved understanding of the developmental implications and long-term consequences of early life lead exposure, a full accounting of the extent of these legacy exposures in the United States is yet to occur. Such an accounting is critical for the following: understanding the true costs and benefits of continued lead regulation and exposure abatement, understanding the potential contribution of lead to the burden of disease over the past 6 decades, and recent improvements in some outcomes like dementia associated with lead exposure, and ultimately improving cognitive, cardiovascular, and aging outcomes in the current generation of adults exposed to lead as children. So, yeah, basically, lead's bad. Don't drink it. We still use lead in stained glass. I feel like lead in stained glass is different because generally you're not, like, putting that into direct contact with something that you're going to ingest, you know? And yeah, it turns out, yeah, it's still, like, this is from yesterday, by the way. Lead from old paint and pipes is still a harmful and deadly hazard in millions of U.S. homes. Affects your entire neurological system. World Health Organization estimates more than 1 million people die every year from lead poisoning. And in more recent years, this number has risen at an incredible pace, with some research showing nearly 5.5 million adults die from lead-related deaths, health complications every year. So, yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Here's just a short little video here.
Lead on children in Flint will begin to reveal itself in toddlers
quickly, but it will show up slower in older children.
Right, and lead is especially toxic to children under the age of 6. So what happens to kids who are exposed to high levels of it?
Our Mara McDonald is live tonight with 2 young men who had their lives irrevocably changed by this. Mara?
Guy, they really did. They were toddlers on the west side of the state back in the 90s. Their parents had no idea that there was lead paint in their homes and that their children were being poisoned. Take a look. Both David and Jerry were adorable little boys whose parents had no idea the lead paint in each of their homes was poisoning their children. David was found to have a level of 47, Jerry nearly 200, both horrifically high. And today,
my part in the day, I like be at school every day.
they have both suffered because of it. Both have developmental disabilities and cognitive problems. Jerry, who will be 21, has a job at a restaurant.
Cleaning, mopping floors, vacuum carpets.
He attends classes for developmentally disabled adults. David graduated from high school and now works with the developmentally disabled children. He'll tell you trying to focus is always hard.
I usually like to think like background music in my head to help focus, because the background music helps even more if you're wearing like headphones with music on.
There will be no college.
yeah.
He was diagnosed with ADHD, Tourette's, and Asperger's. Lead irrevocably changed their lives. Will it do the same for all the children?
Okay, but also those kicks were pretty cool. Like that pretty badass.
Exposed in Flint.
Unfortunately, we don't have an exact number at which we can say that kids are in big trouble. So we know that historically a level of about 10 is a level at which we sort of sound the alarms and get concerned about kids. But kids have done poorly with levels lower than 10, and kids have done great with levels much higher than 10.
Back here live, Dr. Faber says, though, that when younger children, this is going to be easier to see the effects of, if there are going to be negative effects. I mean, we're talking about children who, should be meeting milestones, and if they're not, that's an indicator that there's a real problem here. Guy, Kim, back to you.
Mara, does a doctor have any advice of what parents need to do at this point?
Number one, he says they've got to make sure that these children hit all their pediatrician's appointments, that they have to take advantage of all the services that the government is going to be providing in Flint. And Kim, I don't think we can say it enough. The CDC wants every child under the age of 6 tested for lead in Flint by April 1st. We are live.
And yeah, this video, when did this come out?
We're live.
This came out 5 years ago, right? So, as like a note, again, I want to circle back around here. These parents didn't know that their homes had dangerous levels of lead. They likely didn't know that their home had lead paint. So make sure, folks, that like the paint that is in your home isn't lead paint. Make sure that your pipes aren't full of lead. Because again, what they test are the service lines. They know which service lines are lead. They don't know which individual buildings have lead plumbing. So, a house built during a certain time period, likely during like the 60s, 70s, etc., might have lead plumbing inside the house. You need to get your water not just tested from the service line, because again, the states really only, the state is only responsible for the water that comes into your property. The second it hits your property line, it's now your responsibility to not have it lead poison. And in fact, there have been cases where states will hold individual homeowners accountable because there are lead pipes on their property leaking lead into the water supply. What about rental properties? Honestly, if you're on an older rental property, I would suggest getting some kind of test done. I would suggest getting your tap water tested. And it might be kind of a pain in the ass to get it done, but you know, especially if you're planning on being there for a long period of time, get it tested. And you might be asking, hey, Jack, why are you talking about this? Like, what's the deal here? Well, there are two reasons. There are two reasons, okay? Number one, I wanted to make you all aware that the FDA has recalled cinnamon products, or at least warned people not to eat certain cinnamon products because they are contaminated with lead. Specifically, an analysis by the FDA found that the 6 products had elevated lead levels from 2.03 to 3.4 parts per million. So, yeah, if you're using, do we have the list here? The ground cinnamon was supplied by the Ecuadorian company Negasmart. Let's see, do we have... Yeah, the warning comes after the recall of lead-contaminated cinnamon applesauce pouches as well. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, Wanabana cinnamon applesauce pouches. No safe level of lead. Here we go. The ground cinnamon products found to contain lead are La Fiesta from La Superior Supermercados, Markham, Save-A-Lot, MK from SF Supermarket, Swad from Patel Brothers, Supreme Tradition from Dollar Tree and Family Dollar, and Eli Shilar from La Jolla Morelense. So, just be aware of that, please. And the other thing, the other reason I'm bringing it up is because of this. Just gonna zoom in here. This is Chris Kobach. He is the current Attorney General of Kansas. And he's been a prominent political figure in Kansas for a while now. Tweeting out yesterday, after the State of the Union address, where Biden, you might have noticed Biden mentioned something about, replacing lead pipes in America. Well, here's Chris Kobach. Biden wants to replace lead pipes. He failed to mention that underfunded mandate sets an almost impossible timeline, will cost billions, infringe on the rights of the states and their residents, all for benefits that may be entirely speculative. Basically, this guy is trying to tell you that lead poisoning is speculative. That, we haven't been able to determine lead poisoning before. It's just a hypothetical thing that might happen sometimes. It's not speculative. You just saw 2 kids with lead poisoning. Chris Kobach, by the way, has been continuing to push this time after time after time. Just as an FYI. Just as an FYI here. Distribution of childhood lead levels, here, up from, yeah. This is from the same study we looked at, by the way. Chris Kobach would have been born right about here. During, the height of the, lead poisoning era. He's literally arguing that your right as an American includes the right to be poisoned by your government. he thinks it's an infringement on your rights as an American to not be poisoned. Like, I can't, I'm not even making this up. This is from just last month. Kobach leads coalition demanding Biden drop unnecessary EPA rule. He's literally leading a coalition of states suing the EPA for trying to get them to replace lead pipes so that we can stop poisoning children. When I say that Republicans want you dead, it's not hyperbole. He's literally leading a coalition of Republicans fighting for their right to poison you and your family. Like, there's no other way to say it, right? Like, lead poisoning is real. We've known about it since the 1800s. We've known about it for a long, long time. And yet, it's entirely speculative that not being poisoned by lead will have good benefits for you. The Republican Party is a death cult. It puts people in power like this who only exist to make your life worse. He's literally trying to poison you. He's trying to poison you to save a buck, so that his rich donors don't have to pay their taxes. The Republican Party is riddled with people who want you dead and who, quite frankly, are evil. There's no other way to justify this. They're just evil. It's okay. I'll be fine. I'm rich. I don't use water. God. Also, Chris Kobach, just as a few other points. The reason I know who Chris Kobach is, and I saw this tweet and I went a little bit crazy about it, is because Donald Trump put him in charge of finding voter fraud. And not only did he not find voter fraud as part of this Trump commission, specifically tasked and given multiple years to try and find voter fraud evidence, but his process of trying to find fraudulent voters fixated on a couple of people who made honest mistakes. And it turns out that the state of Kansas had to agree to a $1.9 million settlement because he kept accusing random citizens of voter fraud without any evidence and creating hate mobs that would go after them. He literally cost taxpayers multiple millions of dollars because he was busy just fabricating lies about how they were gaming the political system. This guy exists specifically to be evil to you, the voter, the taxpayer, the person trying to live and raise a family while not being poisoned by your local water supply. So, yeah, Chris Kobach, maybe you shouldn't be the Attorney General of Kansas anymore, since, you're trying to poison the people of Kansas.